Welcome to Diamonds in Dumpster Fires. I'm Melie, and this is the podcast for people who are determined to find a glimmer of hope even while the fires of life are burning around them. Together, we'll dumpster dive through all sorts of topics like divorce, dating, friendships, grief, career ups and downs, and so much more. All with a sense of humor and absolutely no toxic positivity. Are you ready? Let's go. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Diamonds in Dumpster Fires, The Strength to Keep Going, a survival guide for hard times. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever had one of those days when you wake up thinking everything is fine and then life just sucker punches you in the face? Yeah, me too. You know, the thing is, we never really know when hard times are coming. Sure, sometimes there are warning signs, like, for example, my divorce. Even though it was quite a surprise, especially a surprise the way that my ex decided to conduct the divorce, there were some warning signs. And then there are other times when things just happen out of the blue. A couple years ago, I went through a layoff at work, and I honestly had no idea that it was coming. My manager had no idea that it was coming. It was just one of those things. The week had been going well. It was a Thursday. I had just gotten off work. And then all of a sudden, I get an email on my personal email address from the company I work for. And the email said how much they regretted what they were about to do, but that they were going to be letting go of a large percentage of people. I believe it was somewhere around 30% of people. And the way that we would know if we were one of the 30% that was let go was that in about a half an hour, our company computers would shut off. So, I'm sitting there refreshing. My computer seems to be working. And all this panic is setting in because, what if I'm one of the ones to go? Now, at the time, I was the only person with my particular job title. So I felt like, okay, maybe, they'll keep me because I'm the only person. Things had been going well for me. I had this big workshop that I was hosting the following week. I had just completed a significant project that was bringing a lot of praise from others at the company. But lo and behold, about 30 minutes after receiving that email, my company laptop shut down, and I just remember being in complete shock. I mean, I had meetings scheduled for the next day. What about that workshop? What about that email that I still needed to respond to? And oh my goodness, now I need to find a job like right now, right? I don't even know what my latest resume is called in the files on my computer. So I quickly get my computer out. I jump on LinkedIn. I start doom scrolling job openings. Everything was happening in a blur. And I remember feeling this just like panic. And then after I kind of went through that for a few minutes, I remember just sitting there at my desk, staring at the wall, reminding myself to breathe, telling myself, okay, you've got this. You will do something about this. You will handle this. But it's 6 p.m. on a Thursday night. What can you do right now? I knew in that moment that I had a choice. I could either let this situation completely derail me, or I could let it be a catalyst for change. That does not mean that I felt strong in the moment, quite the contrary. But sometimes choosing strength isn't about feeling strong or making all the right decisions in the moment. It's just about not quitting, showing up for yourself, allowing yourself to go with the flow and figure things out. In some ways, it kind of reminds me of when I'm watching somebody in the ocean trying to come back to shore. And I say watching and not doing because honestly, this is not something that I ever usually choose to do. I have before, probably never will again. But if you watch someone who's out in the water and they want to come to shore and they start sort of flailing about and trying to swim, back to shore as the waves are pulling back out to the ocean and they're struggling and, they may swallow water, they may get tired. But if they allow the ocean to do its thing and they go with the flow of the water, they may be body surfing, catch a wave, they can ride that wave into shore. And that's life sometimes. We aren't passively allowing the waves to take us down, but we don't quit. We work with the situation we're in. We flow forward. We understand that sometimes, circumstances are not ideal, but we keep going anyway. This week, as I am recording this episode, I actually just went through something that kind of derailed me yet again. There was a situation that had seemed to be going in a bad way, and then it turned itself around, and I was so excited, and I felt so happy and so good about how things were turning out, and then suddenly the whole thing came crashing down around me. So, I don't feel strong right now in that situation, but I'm not going to quit moving forward. And let me be clear, this episode is not necessarily about finding joy in trials that you're going through, but it is about finding the next step when everything seems to be falling apart. So let's talk for a minute about what strength isn't. Because strength is not what we often think it is. Sometimes people will say something like, strength means being unshaken. Nope, strength does not mean that. Strength means being shaken, but standing back up. Again, going back to the analogy of the person trying to get to shore, they're being shaken around, thrown around, but they are continuing to move forward. Another misconception that a lot of times, people might get the impression of because of the way someone is showing up on social media or things that they're saying is that strong people don't struggle. That is also false. Strength can be messy, ugly, exhausting. Look, when I went through the layoff, that moment when I realized that my career security wasn't as solid as I thought, or when I went through the divorce, the feeling of having to rebuild a life that I never planned to restart. I would have told you before those things that I was strong. And then if you had seen me in the midst of the beginnings of the divorce and the layoff, you would have thought, boy, this woman is not strong at all. But you know what? I kept standing back up. And in the end, yes, my divorce did go through and I am making a new life for myself. The layoff happened and it took me a few months, but I ended up landing a contract at a company that I had always wanted to work for. And then when that ended, I ended up retraining and getting into a new field entirely. So if you are going through something right now and it's tough, just remember, strength means being shaken and standing back up, and strong people do struggle. So how does this tie into our faith? 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 9 and 10 say, "But he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is perfected in weakness. Therefore I will most gladly boast all the more about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may reside in me. So I take pleasure in weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and in difficulties for the sake of Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong.'" And you know why we're strong in those times when we are going through the hardships and the persecutions and the difficulties? It is because Christ is with us. When we're weak, He is strong. And we don't have to worry about standing on our own power or doing things in our own might, because God's strength is made perfect in our weaknesses. So, let's say you are in the midst of something right now. You're in the trenches. You're going through it. You need a survival guide, right? You need to know how to keep going. I put together a few steps here that I wanted to share. And number one is accept the fallout. In other words, stop pretending you're fine. Denial is not a strategy. It is so important to acknowledge your pain rather than ignoring it. Because the thing is, if you start denying the pain that you're going through or the struggle that you're facing, it doesn't just go away. You can't just push it down and then never see it again. It will come back up, and sometimes at very inconvenient moments. When I was going through my divorce at first, I acted like I was fine. I was strangely calm, and sure, part of that is kind of how I cope with a crisis, but part of it was also denial. I didn't want to accept that my world was falling apart. But it was only when I did accept that my world was falling apart was I able to start picking up the pieces. So acknowledge your pain. Stop pretending you're fine. You can tell people that you're not fine. It's okay to ugly cry in your car. You don't want to live there forever, but it's okay to get it out. It's healthy to get it out. Psalm 34:18 tells us, "The Lord is near the brokenhearted. He saves those crushed in spirit." Honestly, this verse has spoken to my heart so many times. If I were a tattoo person, I'd probably get this verse somewhere where I could see it all the time. Because it is so true. The Lord is near the brokenhearted. He does save those who are crushed in spirit. So now that you've acknowledged your pain, what do you do next? Well, you do the next right thing, even if it's tiny. Look, when life falls apart, the big picture is really overwhelming. You can shrink it down, though. You don't have to take huge leaps forward. You can take tiny steps. So in coaching, there is this thing called the 1-degree principle, and it came from UCLA behavioral scientist Dr. Robert Maurer. Basically, what he found was that change can often make someone stop taking action because our brains perceive change as threat, even if the change is good. We have this fear response that kicks in and tries to protect us, but sometimes it keeps us from the good things we want to accomplish. So, in order to avoid triggering that fear response, it's helpful to make tiny changes that don't feel big. You can take one small step in the direction you want to go, and you'll improve little by little without all that overwhelm. So let's take, for example, a person who wants to find a new job. That whole cycle of applying, interviewing, giving notice, learning a new skill, showing your portfolio, doing practice projects. I work in the field of tech, and so that's sort of the process, that I've gone through. I'm sure every industry has its own grueling process. The point is, it feels really overwhelming, right? But what if you took just one step at a time? Maybe start with your resume, and not just, your resume. That's actually a big step. Start with just updating your most recent role. You start there, just the title of your most recent role. Break it down as tiny as you need to. That's the kind of change we're talking about. Then, as you do that, you take the next step. You're improving 1 degree at a time, and little by little, you'll get there without the overwhelm. After my layoff, I realized it wasn't about finding my dream job in that moment. It was just about sending one email, updating my resume. After my divorce, I realized it wasn't about healing overnight, as, wonderful as that would have been, but nobody does that. It was about, honestly, getting through one meal at a time, one day at a time, being able to fall asleep at night. Like these little increments helped, one day at a time. So what do you do next? You're taking tiny steps forward. You've acknowledged your pain. Next, borrow strength until you can find yours again. So at this stage, community is crucial. Don't isolate yourself. And I say this as somebody who works from home, and then in my spare time, I am in my vocal booth by myself, either recording this podcast for you or narrating an audiobook. And so I find myself isolated a lot, and I will tell you it's really difficult. So I have been making an effort to try and get out. I go to church, and I'm trying to find the right church, for me to make my home church. I'm trying to find that community because it really is crucial. It's so important when you're hurting or when you're going through anything to have people to lean on. One thing I think I've shared about before on the podcast is that when I was going through my divorce, I found a divorce support group through a local church that was really helpful. We started out meeting online because I got divorced in the middle of COVID. And then after everything opened back up, I did actually find time to go in and meet these people in person. And it was really great to just be able to share experiences. When I went through the layoff, somebody who also had been laid off created a Slack channel for all the fellow ex-employees to join. And, it was really nice. We were just on there sharing stories, remembering things that had happened. People were posting memes. And then a really cool thing started happening in there as people started to find jobs and move on. They would make recommendations and they'd be like, hey, so-and-so, you'd be great for this role. You should come interview. And it was just this really great community that came together to help each other out. So you don't have to be strong alone. You can find the people who will stand in the gap for you. Remember, for example, in Exodus, Moses needed Aaron and Hur to hold up his arms. Even leaders get tired. So don't try to do it yourself. Don't try to isolate and think, I'll come out of this once I'm better and once I feel better, and then I'll pull people into my circle. No, let people support you now. And if you don't have people in your life who can support you, try finding some kind of a support group. There's nothing wrong with it. You can do it online. Personally, I do a lot of things online, so I always try to advocate for getting out and meeting people in person. I actually, not that long ago, started going to these networking events to meet people in person. It's for people who have businesses, which I don't really have, but I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go and meet people. And I was so incredibly awkward. But you know what? I met some people that I'm still in contact with today. So it's good to be around other people. So, okay, you're getting out there. You're finding some borrowed strength. What else do you do? Well, you can redefine what strength looks like. As I mentioned before, strength isn't really about feeling good. It's about getting up when you want to stay down. It's about laughing even when it hurts. And no, I'm not saying that, you should be laughing at your circumstances, especially if you're going through something really big. But finding a way to add laughter into your life can be really cathartic. For example, whenever I'm going through something, I will try to find a comedy special or even just some YouTubes of comedians that I really like, because it is so good for the soul to just be able to laugh when you're going through stuff. And then, of course, trust God, even when you have your doubts. Sometimes it seems like circumstances are just stacking up against us and we don't know what to do. And it looks like, life is not going to turn around in this moment. But those are the times when we really need to lean on God and trust Him. So looking back at the layoff I went through, I didn't realize it at the time, but I was really, really building resilience. And resilience is so important, and we will be doing an episode on resilience coming up soon. But as I was going through the layoff, it took me about 3 months to get a job, and I didn't get a full-time, employee job. I got a contract, which had an end date. And so, I had to navigate that when that came up as well. And it was so hard, as I was going through the process of interviewing. I would get through several rounds of interviews with a company and it seemed like it was going well, and then I would get ghosted. If you work in tech as well, this is how it goes. And, maybe it is the same way with other industries. But I know with tech specifically, you do all kinds of work. Sometimes you have to, do projects or present a portfolio. You would do your best. You get on these Zoom calls. You walk through all of this stuff. You meet with so many people. I know I went with some companies 8 or 9 rounds of interviews, not even counting like a panel that I ended up having to present to. I would hang up after these calls and I would have just been giving it my all and I feel like I was going to fall apart. I felt weak. But the fact is, I was building resilience day by day. And the same thing with my divorce. I felt so broken as I was going through it. It is really, really hard to accept that the person that you chose to do life with has decided to head in an entirely new direction, leaving you in the dust. And it's really hard to accept that they're doing that and not even really giving you the reasons why or being willing to talk to you. But it's in those moments when we build resilience. No, I didn't make every decision perfectly in those first few years. And I certainly, I'm still growing and learning and healing. But even the bad decisions I made led me to develop strength and resilience through the hard times. And recently I was watching a training and they said something that really stuck with me. They said, there are no failures, only feedback. And if you've studied anything with like NLP or anything of that, you've heard this statement before. But I really like that. There is no failure, only feedback. So it's a reframe. It helps you to look at life and look at things like, for example, my divorce. Yes, my divorce, you could say, failed. But I have received feedback, right? Instead of looking at it as like a failure, like I have failed as a person because I'm divorced, I can look at it as like, this is how my life changed. This is some feedback for things that I can do differently in the future, and then move forward from it. It's a much more positive, without going into toxic positivity, but it is a much more positive way of looking at the things that happen to us. So the last stage in this little survival guide is to celebrate your wins. I get it so completely. When you're going through a hard time, it's really hard to celebrate anything. I distinctly remember the day that I was supposed to be moving into my new place, after my divorce. I had stayed with family for a little while we worked out all the details and all that stuff. And then I get my own place. And that really should have been a celebration. I should have been able to celebrate that I was in a position to support myself after my divorce. But I was really, really sad. I actually felt like I didn't have the right to be happy about something good that had happened for me simply because there was so much going on in my life that I wasn't happy about. But that was totally the wrong attitude. Because as much as it sometimes goes against my nature, I've come to realize that multiple things even conflicting things can all exist together. So, I can both be sad about my divorce and I can also be proud of myself for getting my own place. I could be both scared about my layoff and also relieved that I no longer have to work at a job that I don't enjoy. I could be stressed about finding a new job and also be hopeful that the future was going to get better. Sometimes when we feel stuck and like we won't survive in a current situation we're in, it can often be because we're viewing it in black and white. Even now I feel this. I can both have my heart broken by someone and at the same time be hopeful that there will be love for me someday. And that's actually really hard for me to say because I'm still working on making that belief true. But it doesn't mean just because one person wasn't able to give me the love that I deserve doesn't mean nobody will, So acknowledge those wins and celebrate them. So if you are at the point where you feel like you have nothing left, and there will be days like that, there are days when you just don't want to keep going. First of all, I want you to know that that's normal. It is normal to feel like everything has crashed down around you, but don't stay in that place. This is when you do need to reach out to your community. This is when you do need to take those teeny tiny steps and move forward. Isaiah 40:31 says, "But those who trust in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not become weary. They will walk and not faint." Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. And sometimes strength is just letting God carry you when you have nothing left to give. So if today you find yourself in survival mode, focus on this. Think of one thing that you are grateful for today, and it can be the tiniest little thing. Then think of one small action you can take. And when I say small, it can be the tiniest action. Maybe you add one word to a resume if you're looking for a new job, And then find one person you can reach out to. And this could just be a simple text, just letting someone know, hey, I'm going through some stuff. Could you pray for me? Or do you have time to talk later? So one thing to be grateful for, one small action to take, and one person you can reach out to. And if all else fails, coffee and a nap can often do wonders. So as we wrap up here, remember, strength isn't about never falling apart. It's about learning how to get back up, even if you do it with mascara running down your face. God's strength is bigger than your worst moments, and you will get through this. So what's one thing that you can do today to take a step forward? Feel free to join me on social media and share it with me. I can't wait to hear how you're all doing. And until next time, be well. Thank you for listening to this episode of Diamonds in Dumpster Fires. Stay tuned for the next episode where we'll dive into more of life's big topics with a sense of humor and without toxic positivity. Please subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and if you could leave a review, that helps the show reach more people and change more lives. Thank you so much.